This is a production of West Virginia Public Broadcasting.
Support for the Legislature Today is provided by West Virginia University, offering education, healthcare, and the opportunity to achieve career success since 1867. Information at wvu.edu.
Sonesta Suites in Charleston, an extended stay hotel located near the airport, downtown, and the state capitol. More at sonesta.com.
Solar Hauler, supporting Appalachian communities and building on West Virginia's history of powering the nation by bringing solar energy and battery backup to homeowners, nonprofits, and businesses throughout the region. More at solarhauler.com.
Welcome to the Legislature Today. I'm Curtis Tate. The Senate approved Senate Bill 505 Thursday. The bill changes how power plants operate in the state and passed 22-11. Among the yes votes, Senator Chris Rose, the Monongalia County Republican who chairs the Energy Industry and Mining Committee. Rose works for Mon Power, which opposes the bill. In committee earlier this week, Rose asked to recuse himself but was directed to vote. Mon Power referred to an earlier statement in which the company advised Rose to keep his job separate from his legislative role. The House of Delegates also took up a bill in today's session that will move the deadline to switch from one party to another before filing to run for political office. Currently, it stands at 60 days. If House Bill 3305 becomes law, that deadline will move to 180 days before filing. Delegate Mike Pushkin, a Democrat from Kanawha County and the Democratic Party chairman of the state, attempted to amend the bill to carve out a change for independents. He argued that they are the fastest growing segment of the state's population and wanted to keep them at 60 days. That amendment failed, and the bill moves to third reading in the House. A bill that would expand the unemployment and training requirements necessary for SNAP food benefits has passed the Senate and is now under consideration in the House of Delegates. Supporters of Senate Bill 249 see possible gains in increasing the state's dismal workforce participation rate. Opponents say passage could hurt needy families and increase government bureaucracy. Randy Yohe has our story.
Huntington's Facing Hunger Food Bank helps feed more than 125,000 people a year. Facing Hunger CEO Cindy Kirkhart says clients receiving SNAP, or Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program benefits, receive $12 of food resources to every $1 of charitable food interventions.
So SNAP's very important to the folks that we serve, obviously, and really helps to allow more choice at the family level of being able to go out and purchase things directly versus relying on what we may have at any given point.
Originating in the Senate Workforce Committee, SB 249 raises the age of workforce participation requirements, which right now end at 54. If passed, the bill would require all able-bodied adults without dependents between the ages of 18 and 59 to take part in an employment and training program, with some exceptions. Bill sponsors say expanding mandatory employment and training for SNAP benefits will address issues regarding the state's labor force participation rate. The workforce participation rate means the percentage of working-age population that are either employed or actively seeking employment. Now, West Virginia consistently ranks last or near last in that category nationally. But Kirkhart is among those who say raising the SNAP benefit employment and training program age from 54 to 59 in a state laden with aging retirees could be detrimental on several fronts.
We see are so many grand families, folks who are grandparents who are now raising their grandchildren and great-grandchildren for a variety of reasons. Obviously, the state's still reeling somewhat from the opioid epidemic. So I think that raising that age limit, then, those folks who may need to assist in childcare when daycare is not otherwise available, we're asking them to make increasingly harder choices.
Another change the bill makes, increasing the time per week for training. Currently, SNAP recipients are exempt from time limits on benefits as long as the person is employed or in a program designed to gain employment for at least 20 hours per week or 80 hours per month. SB 249 increases the hours per week required to maintain eligibility to 30 hours per week or 120 hours per month. The hope here again to raise the workforce participation rate. Kirkhart says employment in 2025 is not like it used to be.
A full-time job was easy to acquire. There were lots of benefits to full-time work. What you see is a lot of businesses, and especially at the kind of lower end of skill level, you know, those basic jobs that we all rely on people to do. Those companies aren't necessarily hiring at 40 hours a week or 30 hours a week. And frankly, even if they hire them for 20 hours a week, if they have opportunity to send that person home early, they will.
Kirkhart says West Virginia SNAP already has work reporting requirements that exceed federal policy. Bill sponsors are among those who tout the long list of social exemptions to the policy and say resulting increased employment offers many positive individual and state benefits. For the Legislature Today, I'm Randy Yohe in Huntington.
Lawmakers in the House took on a novel source of power for West Virginia Thursday morning. Chris Schultz has more.
On paper, House Bill 2205 is a fairly simple bill. It clarifies that the construction and operation of small nuclear reactors for electric power generation in the state falls under the jurisdiction of the West Virginia Public Service Commission. Delegate Henry C. Dillon, a Republican from Wayne County, stood to oppose the bill, asking if nuclear power would lead to the decarbonization of the electrical grid.
A few years ago, when the coal plants were being closed down, a phrase that we heard quite often was, learn to code. You know, you got displaced from your job at the mine or at the power plant, just learn to code. And I wonder, now is this aligning with our core competencies and our skilled workforce in West Virginia? Or are we going to tell people, learn to nuke?
Delegate Mark Zatazalo, a Republican from Hancock County and the vice chair of the House Energy and Public Works Committee, stated his committee heard testimony that at least one microreactor was expected to be used at Marshall University for academic purposes. Zatazalo said the reactor could be used for nuclear material analysis and highlighted the potential economic impacts of such applications.
If we have ash piles, I don't know whether we do, but I suspect we do, from coal, you could do slides and determine what critical minerals could be in that ash and get ready to use it for something better. That's just one example.
Delegate Brandon Steele, a Republican from Raleigh County and the bill's lead sponsor, called West Virginia the battery of the East Coast. He said emergent technology like AI and electric vehicles will triple electricity demand in coming years, and diversifying the state's energy sources will help to sell power to markets averse to coal generation.
The math problem requires more coal, but the math problem also requires, if we're going to enter into new markets to be the battery of the East Coast, then we're going to have to add something else. These are real jobs. These are high-paying jobs in a high-technology environment. And as I told the gentleman from the 11th, they are anchors. They don't go away.
Delegate Rick Hillenbrand, a Republican from Hampshire County and the vice chair of the Environment, Infrastructure, and Technology Committee, clarified that the bill does not mandate the creation of any new facilities, but simply establishes the regulatory mechanism to do so in the future. The bill to clarify local jurisdiction over micronuclear reactors passed the House on a vote of 90-5, and now heads to the Senate for further consideration. For the Legislature Today, I'm Chris Schultz.
Our regular viewers know we like to bring in outside reporters from time to discuss bills they are watching. This week, we're joined by Caity Coyne, a reporter from the nonprofit news organization West Virginia Watch. She joined Briana Heaney and I here in our studio. Hi, Bree. Welcome, Caity. Good to see you both.
Yeah.
Gosh, it's been a long road to get here, and there's still a few more weeks to go. There's a lot going on. So, Caity, could you tell us what you've been following and what's been exciting in your world this week?
Yeah, I have been following kind of a mix of things in committees to the floor, and I think the biggest bill this week was the bill to ban DEI, which passed the Senate yesterday. Unsurprisingly passed the Senate, I think it's pretty safe to say. And that was, now it heads to the House. That's a policy priority by Patrick Morrissey. It'll be, if it makes it through the House, which I think, again, we're pretty confident that it'll probably pass as long as they get it in by the deadline. Gonna ban DEI in all state institutions and schools. So that was something that he announced, that the governor announced pretty early on. It was one of his executive orders that he signed his first day in office, second day, first week, definitely. And I think, what was notable about watching that yesterday, we've had attempts to do this in the past. We had critical race theory bills kind of year after year for a while, and to hash back what critical race theory is years later is essentially the idea that schools and other institutions are teaching that white people are inferior to people of other races.
And that America is systemically racist.
And systemically racist, yeah. And I just think it's a fact that is not true. Or it is not true that that is what CRT is, if that makes sense, yeah. And those bills have failed for the past few years. So this is the first time that I think we're really going to see this and have a governor that's really pushing for it. So we've maybe had a few years to prepare for what a bill like this looks like, but not this exact one. And it goes further than any of those other bills went. I mean, banning the use of pronouns in classrooms, preferred pronouns for kids.
It would, teachers didn't have to use them.
Right.
They wouldn't face any consequences if they refused.
Yeah, basically giving them immunity from any sort of civil liability or anything like that comes against them. And that's going to be really interesting to see play out if someone does bring legal action, because there are federal education rules that sort of talk about fairness in the classroom that way.
I would think that's likely to happen.
Yeah, definitely.
And also, one of the questions with that was, the caveat was if it didn't align with that person's biological sex, which, again, and this has been one of the issues that a lot of these trans bills have run into, and there have been a lot of trans bills. How do we verify one's biological sex?
Yeah, and we want to jump into that.
Right. So if a teacher isn't calling someone by their preferred pronouns, how do they know that those pronouns truly don't align with that person's biological sex or not?
Yeah, and this is, it seems like it's kind of opening the door, and the DEI bill does a lot more than that, right? It stops, any program that's targeted toward, pretty safe to say, a minority of any kind. And there's one exception in there, West Virginia will accept people who are in poverty, first-time college going, those are still phrases that we accept, but nothing about race, identity, gender. And it was pretty interesting to hear on the floor the argument for this essentially being, we don't need to pretend, or we don't need to act like America, and by extension West Virginia, is a racist place. There were quotes of, it's just not a problem anymore. The fact that there's claims that we don't give women the same rights, or that people of color don't get the same rights. That's not true. And it was interesting to me, it's the same arguments that they used to make about the Fairness Act. We don't see people being discriminated against because of their sexual orientation or their gender identity. And then they would always say that, but we don't have a place for people to report that. And most people who are victims of these kinds of crimes don't report it. So it was kind of a depressing debate to listen to. I wouldn't even call it a debate, I guess.
Well, I'm actually glad that you mentioned anti-discrimination, because among other things, a bill to basically invalidate local anti-discrimination ordinances passed in the Senate. I can't remember the name of the number of the bill.
House rules. Home rules.
Home rule.
Yeah,
right.
home rule.
Dealing with home rule. Now, of course, these are called fairness laws, anti-discrimination laws that protect LGBTQ people from discrimination, employment, and public accommodations. That's not written into state code. That is something that LGBTQ groups would like to see, but so far hasn't happened. So about 20 municipalities statewide have enacted their own, but this bill would basically render them ineffective.
Well, and I think the interesting thing along with a lot of these bills is the premise argument for a lot of these bills is that racism no longer exists.
Right, or homophobia or sexism or whatever the ism is, yeah.
But those arguments are typically made, at least in my recollection, of all but one of yesterday's testimony by white men.
Yep.
And they're heard by overwhelmingly white men. The Senate only has 4 women and is overwhelmingly white.
Yeah,
so
legislature in general.
The legislature in general, yeah.
Male and white, yeah.
Yep, yeah.
Yeah, and that was, a big thing. It's interesting, like, you run into these things when you choose to put yourself in circles and regions where you are, like, you're working with people and engaging with people who have different cultural backgrounds and different backgrounds than you. And I'm not going to say that these people aren't doing that, but it's easy to say that racism isn't a problem anymore when your skin looks like mine. It's very easy to say that because I know I'm not dealing with racism day to day personally, like me, but I have friends who I've witnessed it happen to, and that's like something that I think would do anyone any good. I think it's not biased and it's not liberal and it's not leftist or whatever to say that like systemic racism is very real and there are systems that are holding back people of color, people of a certain gender, people of a certain identity, and we should at least acknowledge that they exist. In this bill, you can have opinions on whether the bill is good or bad or whether we need to have these systems or not. You can't have, I don't think it's right to have an opinion that they don't exist. I don't think that's an opinion.
Well, Bree, what else have you been looking at?
So the big bill, this is seems like decades ago, but Monday of this week, there was the vaccine bill died on the House floor.
Fascinating.
Which was I think that
vaccine exemption bill.
Yeah, the vaccine exemption bill. So the bill essentially would have provided which iteration of the bill we're talking about brings into many questions because the bill changed, it did a full 360 turn. But the first iteration of the bill, the Senate's bill,
right.
Now that's not even actually covering the first iteration of the bill that was the governor's bill that the Senate then changed. But so the bill that came out of the Senate, that was passed by the Senate, had philosophical and religious exemptions, which, by the way, is in line with most of the country's exemption policy.
Like 5 states or something like that?
Yeah, and we're the only state that has a Republican governor, Republican Senate, Republican House that does not have this religious or philosophical exemption. So basically there was a bill to grant parents or guardians in the state a religious or philosophical exemption. Now this bill was pretty lenient. I could have, there was the joke said in the Senate that you could write it down on a paper towel.
Bram and Steele flew Hardy back and forth.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Your dynamic duo going at each other. Yeah, there was a conversation about, you could write this on a sticky note, then you could write this on a piece of toilet paper, then there was an actual piece of paper towel that they were exchanging back and forth to prove this point.
Really serious things happening.
Yeah, right. Yes. Very official business. And so anyway, the bill, and it's also good to note that this passed with flying colors in the Senate. That was more so on the cusp of the measles outbreak that's happening in Texas and in other states. By the time that it had made it over to the House and all the different amendments and everything, when it was finally being voted on, that outbreak was bigger. There have been, unfortunately, more fatalities. And I think that caused a lot of pause and kind of changed the context in which this bill was happening. And I felt like you could have heard a pen drop on the floor when I looked behind me. I knew it was going to be a close-ish vote,
I didn't expect it to be what it was, though.
I didn't expect
I can't
it to
remember
be.
the final count. It was 50-something to 40-something, I think.
It was a majority of Republicans along with
all Democrats.
All Democrats, yeah. It was a surprise. And the only other bill that I think we've seen that happen with this year has been the campaign finance one about.
I thought certificate of need was
that was in committee, yeah.
Oh, in committee,
yeah.
okay.
So it's interesting. I mean, we don't have a legislature that gets along bipartisanly. And I think most of them would say we didn't vote. They voted against it for different reasons, probably, than the Democrats did. But and it started this there's a lot of drama happening with that now. I mean, from what I'm hearing, the Senate's pretty upset that the House didn't push it. There's, we're getting more of that infighting that's been the norm for the last few years. Is kind of rearing its head now in our last few weeks, which is going to be interesting to see how that plays out post crossover and
absolutely
different legislative rules this year. I mean, the Senate kind of needs the House in a way it didn't before.
Yeah,
that's
absolutely. Absolutely. And we started off this session with the Senate and the House. A lot of people in the Senate were telling me this is the best working relationship we've had in years. Now it feels like
we're back to 2023, 2024.
Exactly. Yeah. And the vaccines bill seemed to really be the break glass, that intense moment where more visibly things shifted. Yeah.
Well, crossover day, speaking of which, is coming up next week. And another one of the governor's priorities is the microgrid bill, the one that would expand the number of microgrids in the state to support data centers. That hasn't really gotten very far at this point. He spoke to Governor Morrissey, that is, spoke to a group of folks from the natural gas industry at the Capitol yesterday, and he said that he's continuing to push for it. I know that Appalachian Power and Mon Power have some concerns with it. Probably the Coal Association does too. So there's not a lot of time left to address that. And are there other things that you both have seen in our remaining minute and a half or so that have kind of stalled or don't seem to be getting traction?
Yeah, I think, I'm interested to see, stalled CON, like you mentioned before, certificate of need repeal. That's dead, allegedly. But that was it was the only piece of healthcare policy, aside from vaccine exemptions, that Morrissey really called for. So I'm interested. There's one bill up today in a committee in about 30 minutes looking at micro hospitals or something. But I'm interested to see if they'll try to weave that into other pieces of legislation, or if that bill, if the House can push it through, will be a vehicle to amend on the floor in the last few days for total repeal, because they've tried that before. And I'll be really interested to see that.
I mean, just in general, it's been interesting to watch some of the governor's bills fast-tracked.
And others just disappear.
Like, for example, what is the legislative support behind that microgrid thing? That seems like one of the things that got the least amount of support of all of his.
Scott Heckert said today they don't have the votes for it. He called him a munchkin on air and said he doesn't have the votes for it. And that's another point of tension. I think it was Metro News, yeah.
I did hear that he said that. Okay.
Well, and he's often called the gentleman from New Jersey.
That's another tension point that's really going to be important in the last few weeks, I think. How is Morrissey pushing for bills? How is his team pushing for bills? And is it going to pay off? And my read right now is legislators are not happy with the governor, and they don't feel like they owe him anything.
All right, well, I guess we'll have to leave it there and just see what happens next week and the final days coming to the close. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you.
That was Caity Coyne of West Virginia Watch, speaking with me and Briana Heaney in our studio. That's it for tonight. Thank you for joining us. Catch the Legislature Today Monday through Friday at 6 p.m. And remember, West Virginia Public Broadcasting covers the session daily in our radio news program West Virginia Morning and on our news site wvpublic.org. We also broadcast the daily floor sessions of both the House and the Senate on the West Virginia channel. I'm Curtis Tate. Good evening, and see you here again tomorrow.
Support for the Legislature Today is provided by West Virginia University, offering education, healthcare, and the opportunity to achieve career success since 1867. Information at wvu.edu.
Sonesta Suites in Charleston, an extended stay hotel located near the airport, downtown, and the state capitol. More at sonesta.com.
Solar Hauler, supporting Appalachian communities and building on West Virginia's history of powering the nation by bringing solar energy and battery backup to homeowners, nonprofits, and businesses throughout the region. More at solarhauler.com.